excuse me.
You need some water, Madam Secretary?
Would you like to take?
That's the emails that you sent or received about Libya in 2011, from February through December of 2011. This pile represents the emails you sent or received from early 2012 until the day of the attack. There are 795 emails in this pile. We've counted them. There are 67 emails in this pile in 2012. And I'm troubled by what I see here. And so my questions relate to these piles. In this pile in 2011, I see daily updates, sometimes hourly updates from your staff about Benghazi and Chris Stevens. When I look at this pile, in 2012, I only see a handful of emails to you from your senior staff about Benghazi, and I have several questions for you about this disparity, because we know from talking to your senior advisors that they knew, and many of them are here today, seated behind you, they knew to send you important information, issues that were of importance to you, and I can only conclude by your own records that there was a lack of interest in Libya in 2012. So let's first focus, though, on this pile and what was happening in Libya in 2011. We had an ambassador to Libya, Ambassador Kretz, but you've told us that, and you told us in your opening, you handpicked Chris Stevens to be your special representative in Benghazi, and you sent him there. And by your own emails, most have provided last February, a few provided just a few weeks ago. They show that in March of 11, so we're in March of 11, you had Chris Stevens join you in Paris, where you were meeting with the leader of the Libyan revolution. And after Paris, that is when, as you talked about, Chris Stevens went into Benghazi, I believe in April 5th of 2011, on that Greek cargo ship. How long was he expected to stay? What were Chris Stevens' orders from you about Libya and about Benghazi specifically?
Chris Stevens was asked to go to Benghazi to do reconnaissance, to try to figure out who were the leaders of the insurgency who were based in Benghazi, what their goals were, what they understood would happen if they were successful. It was, as I said, the hard-nosed 21st century diplomacy that is rooted in the old-fashioned necessary work of building relationships and gathering information.
How long was he anticipated to stay in Benghazi? Do you recall?
It was open-ended. We were, in discussing it with him, unsure as to how productive it would be, whether it would be appropriate for him to stay for a long time or a short time. That was very much going to depend upon Chris's own assessment. We knew we were sending someone who understood the area, who understood the language, who understood a lot of the personalities because of the historical study that he used to love to do, and we were going to be guided by what he decided.
I'd like to draw your attention to an email. It's an email found at tab 1. It's an Ops Center email that was forwarded to you from Huma Abedin on Sunday, March 27th, that says at the bottom of the email, so the current game plan is for Mr. Stevens to move no later Wednesday from Malta to Benghazi, but the bottom of the email says the goal of this one-day trip is for him to lay the groundwork for a stay of up to 30 days. So just to refresh that recollection, I believe initially the goal was to go in for 30 days. Were you personally briefed on his security plan prior to him going into Libya? Because
yes,
at that time, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry to interrupt, Gaddafi's forces were still battling the rebels, correct?
Right. That's right.
And so what were you personally briefed before you sent Mr. Stevens into Benghazi?
I was personally told by the officials who were in the State Department who were immediately above Chris, who were making the plans for him to go in, that it was going to be expeditionary diplomacy. It was going to require him to make a lot of judgments on the ground about what he could accomplish, and including where it would be safe for him to be and how long for him to stay. And I think the initial decision was, up to 30 days and reassess, but it could have been 10 days, it could have been 60 days, depending upon what he found and what he reported back to us.
And possibly what was determined about the danger of Benghazi. Who were those officials? Secretary
Well, there were a
Clinton,
number of officials who were
that
working.
were advising you on the security specifically.
Well, with respect to the security, this was a particular concern of the assistant secretary for the bureau in which Chris worked.
And I'm sorry, what was that person's name?
Assistant Secretary Jeff Feldman.
Thank you.
And it was also a concern of the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security, as well as other officials within the State Department. And I think it's fair to say, Congresswoman, this was, we all knew, a risky undertaking. And it was something that was, as I said in my opening statement, more reminiscent of the way diplomacy was practiced back in the 19th century, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have instantaneous communications. You would send diplomats and envoys into places and not hear from them for maybe months. This was obviously not of that kind, but it was not that different in degree from what we had done before, and it was a risky undertaking, and one which Chris volunteered for and was anxious to undertake.
And it was so risky, I'd like to pull up another email from the Ops Center that was forwarded to you from Ms. Abedin on Sunday, April 10th. So he had been there about 5 days, and it indicates that the situation in Ajdabiya had worsened to the point where Stevens is considering departing from Benghazi. This is within 5 days of him going in. Were you aware of that concern within the first 5 days that he had gone in?
Yeah.
And did anyone share that with you? And
Yes.
who did share that with you?
We were aware because we were really counting on Chris to guide us and give us the information from the ground. We had no other sources. There was no American outpost. There was no, American military presence. Eventually, other Americans representing different agencies were able to get into Benghazi and begin to do the same work, but they, of course, couldn't do that work overtly, which is why we wanted a diplomat who could be publicly meeting with people to try to get the best assessment. But it was always going to be a constant risk, and we knew that.
And so let me go back to the risk in 2011, because there was a lot of communication, once again, from your senior staff, from the State Department, to you or from you in 2011. And in fact, that is when Gaddafi fell. He fell in 2011. But then, when we go to 2012, Libya, Benghazi, Chris Stevens, the staff there, they seem to fall off your radar in 2012, and the situation's getting much worse in 2012. It was getting much worse. And let me just share for you, in your records that we have reviewed, there is not one email to you or from you in 2012 when an explosive device went off at our compound in April. There's not a single email in your records about that explosive device. So my question is, this was a very important mission in 2011. You sent Chris Stevens there, but yet when our compound is attacked in 2012, what kind of culture was created in the State Department that your folks couldn't tell you in an email about a bomb in April of 2012?
Well, Congresswoman, I did not conduct most of the business that I did on behalf of our country on email. I conducted it in meetings. I read massive amounts of memos, great deal of classified information. I made a lot of secure phone calls. I was in and out of the White House all the time. There were a lot of things that happened that I was aware of and that I was reacting to. If you were to be in my office in the State Department, I didn't have a computer. I did not do the vast majority of my work on email, and I bet there's a lot of Sid Blumenthal's emails in there from 2011 too.
Well, we'll get
and
to
so
that
I think
later.
that there were, I don't want you to have a mistaken impression about what I did and how I did it. Most of my work was not done on emails with my closest aides, with officials in the State Department, officials in the rest of the government, as well as the White House and people around the world.
And thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure that it's not all done on emails, Madam Secretary, and there are meetings and there are discussions. And so then when our compound took a second attack on June 6th, when a bomb blew a wall through the compound then, no emails at all. But I am interested in knowing, who were you meeting with? Who were you huddling with? How were you informed about those things? Because there is nothing in the emails that talks about 2 significant attacks on our compounds in 2012. There was a lot of information in 2011 about issues and security posture, and yet nothing in 2012.
Well, I'd be happy to explain. Every morning when I arrived at the State Department, usually between 8 and 8:30, I had a personal one-on-one briefing from the representative of the Central Intelligence Agency, who shared with me the highest level of classified information that I was to be aware of on a daily basis. I then had a meeting with the top officials of the State Department every day that I was in town. That's where a lot of information, including threats and attacks on our facilities, was shared. I also had a weekly meeting every Monday with all of the officials, the assistant secretaries and others, so that I could be brought up to date on any issue that they were concerned about. During the day, I received hundreds of pages of memos, many of them classified, some of them so top secret that they were brought into my office in a locked briefcase that I had to read and immediately return to the courier. And I was constantly at the White House in the Situation Room, meeting with the National Security Advisor and others. I would also be meeting with officials in the State Department, foreign officials, and others. So there was a lot going on during every day. I did not email during the day, and except on rare occasions when I was able to, but I didn't conduct the business that I did primarily on email. That is not how I gathered information, assessed information, asked the hard questions of the people that I worked with.
It appears that leaving Benghazi, with respect to all of that danger, leaving Benghazi was not an option in 2012, and I yield back.
And with that, we will go to the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Roby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Clinton, I want to talk to you about August 17th, 2012. On that day, you received 2 memos about Libya and its security. The first one described a deteriorating security situation and what it meant for your people on the ground. The second one also described Libya's security as, in simple terms, a mess. So this memo wanted you to approve $20 million to be given to the Libyan government to bolster its own.
Could you tell me what tab that is on the materials
sure.
that you
Yes,
have
ma'am.
referred to?
The first one is, I believe, is it 33 and 34? 33 and 34.
Thank you.
I apologize. So you received those 2 memos. The second one also described Libya's security in simple terms as a mess, and it was then that you were approached about approving this $20 million that we've referred to as the contingency fund, $20 million that would have gone to the Libyan government to bolster their own security there in country. And in fact, a few days later, you approved that $20 million. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but I want to circle back based on those 2 memos to some questions that my colleague, Mr. Pompeo, asked about the 1998 ARB. You had talked about in that line of questioning that you in fact had made the decision to close some embassies based on the premise that the 1998 ARB recommended the Secretary of State should personally review the security situation. You made a distinction between whether the walls should be 10 foot high versus whether or not it was a highly vulnerable situation. And so I wanted to ask you, when I was listening to that, knowing that I was going to address these August 17th memos, I wanted to ask you, when you were looking at these two memos on August 17th, one said their security was one in disarray, and the other said they paint a picture of a country in chaos. And I wanted to just ask you, in your opinion, as Secretary of State that had closed embassies, whether those references to the security situation in Libya would amount to one as highly vulnerable per your own words.
And I want to answer your question, but I think we need the right tabs.
Excuse me, 8 and 32. I apologize.
Thank you very much. Let me take a look at those, 8 and 32. On August 17th, there was a memo from Beth Jones, the acting Secretary of State, describing a spike in violence and characterizing it as perhaps a new normal. It is very clearly something that we were following, as I have said throughout the hearing today. It said that the International Committee of the Red Cross had withdrawn personnel from Benghazi and Misrata, but continued to work in the rest of Libya. It also pointed out that there is a lack of effective security, and that the transition, the kind of transition we wanted to see for the people of Libya, and particularly in Benghazi, was not as forthcoming from the Libyans themselves. I think that the description here is certainly something that we were aware of, and a list of recent violence in Libya is something we were aware of, and the ongoing monitoring of the situation in Libya is something we took very seriously. I can tell you that these kinds of assessments were not uncommon for other places, high threat, dangerous, unstable places, even war zones, where we were also operating.
Would you characterize those type of descriptions as highly vulnerable?
Well, I think that, again, there was no recommendation based on any of the assessments, not from our State Department experts, not from the intelligence community, that we should abandon either Benghazi or Tripoli.
Right, and I understand that. And Secretary Clinton, you know, I guess one of the questions that we need answered is, you were a huge advocate for our presence there to begin with. What prevented you from making the decision based on the knowledge that you had from these memos about the deteriorating security situation? What prevented you as Secretary of State from making that decision on your own?
Well, Congresswoman, I took into consideration a wide variety of factors. There were a number of places where violence would spike, and we would have to make a decision. At this point, what we were trying to do was work with the Libyan authorities. That's what the August 17th memo from Deputy Secretary Nides refers to. We were trying to provide additional security assistance so that the Libyans could do more to assist themselves. And, you know, it is the case that in the world we're in today, there are a lot of places that are dangerous. Violence goes up and goes down. Part of what Acting Assistant Secretary Beth Jones was referencing in this memo is this is a new normal? And the Secretary does personally oversee the decision to order departure or shut down posts, and it is important to take that ultimate responsibility very much to heart, which I did, but I think that there was no recommendation to do that. Okay. And again, I was following it, I was watching it, I was trying to, you know, make a very well-reasoned analysis, but I was also listening to the people who were both on the ground and with a lot of experience, who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, right, Pakistan, Yemen, other places like that, and there was no recommendation.
Secretary Clinton, what I'm trying to make a distinction between is the decisions that you made with respect to Benghazi and decisions that your staff made with respect to Benghazi. but I'm already running out of time, so I do want to get back to that $20 million that we talked about. On numerous occasions, the finger has been pointed at Congress for not properly funding the security, or the funding not being available for the security requests. Yet I find it curious that you were able to find $20 million to support increased security forces in Libya, yet we weren't able to find money to support your own people on the ground. And, you know, particularly in light of the fact that Mrs. Lamb said that funding wasn't an issue. So I think that it's been a little bit misleading to say it's Congress's fault, but then also it's worth pointing out that there was $20 million found for Libyan security and no dollars found to support increased security for our own people.
Well, as I know you're aware, Congresswoman, the Congress sets spending levels in categories of spending. And as I said earlier, the requests for diplomatic security to do exactly what you are referencing were underfunded. They were underfunded continuously. I am pleased that following the tragedy at Benghazi, we began to get more support from the Congress. But one of the funds that is very important when you're actually talking about an American presence in the country goes back to questions that I was being asked by Congresswoman Duckworth. If we can help build up the Libyan security forces, they are the host country. It is their responsibility to protect diplomatic posts. So I don't see these as unconnected, but it is true that we spent money for diplomatic security out of what the Congress appropriated for diplomatic security.
Secretary Clinton, Kathleen Lamb said herself it wasn't a budget issue. So do you take issue with that statement?
Well, I can only tell you that our analysis of the underfunding of security for our diplomatic posts was very much in line with what I have just said, that we asked for money in this administration in the earlier years, and we were underfunded. And so I can tell you that it would have been very helpful to have more money for diplomatic security, and I want to thank the Congress for upping the amount of money that went to diplomatic security, working with the Defense Department to get more Marines deployed to more posts, and the other actions that have been taken post-Benghazi.
We appreciate that, although, again, I really think there's a conflict between Charlene Lamb's statement and some that you've made about that. But real quickly, Mr. Chairman, I want to run through one quick timeline and make an observation. On August 17th, you received a memo on the deteriorating security in Libya. The same day, you were asked to give $20 million to the Libyan government to beef up its own security. Your department issued a warning telling American citizens to get out of Libya and not to travel there. And then Libya itself issued a, quote, maximum alert for Benghazi. You several times made the statement, and we believe you, that Ambassador Stevens was your friend. And I'm wondering why, with all of this in front of you, the Secretary of State, why did it not occur to you to pick up the phone and call your friend? I know you've mentioned experts. I know you've said that Ambassador Stevens and other diplomats go into these high-threat situations with their eyes wide open. But I just want to hear from you why, with all of this information in front of you, particularly on the date of August 17th, did it not occur to you to pick up the phone and call your friend, Ambassador Stevens, and ask him what he needed?
We knew what he was asking for. Those requests went to the security professionals, and I would only add, with respect to the travel warning, we issued travel warnings for many, many places in the world. They are really aimed at informing American travelers, business travelers, tourists, about conditions that they might face if they go to countries. They are not a criterion for determining whether we keep or end a diplomatic presence. And I just want to go back to the point you were making and read from the Accountability Review Board. For many years, the State Department has been engaged in a struggle to obtain the resources necessary to carry out its work. With varying degrees of success, This has brought about a deep sense of the importance of husbanding resources to meet the highest priorities, laudable in the extreme, but it has also had the effect of conditioning a few State Department managers to favor restricting the use of resources as a general orientation. It is imperative for the State Department to be mission-driven rather than resource-constrained, and one overall conclusion in this report is that Congress must do its part to meet this challenge and provide necessary resources to the State Department to address security risks and meet mission imperatives.
My time is out, and I'm afraid my chairman is going to tell me to be quiet, but the last, do you know
I'm not going to tell you to be quiet. I'm just going to ask you if you might hold it. I'm going to try to be a little quicker on the gavel than I've been, just in the interest of time.
I'll circle back then. Thank you. I yield back.
I'm going to address a couple of things that he said and then recognize myself. Because he invoked the family members of the four, Madam Secretary, and partially this will be for your benefit also, I want to specifically address the family members that are here. There is no theory of the prosecution, Mr. Schiff, because there is no prosecution. There's a very big difference between a prosecution where you already have reached a conclusion and you're just trying to prove it to people. This is an investigation, which is why it's so sad that nowhere in that stack that you just put up there, where the emails of Secretary Clinton, the emails of the ambassador, 50,000 pages worth of documents, eyewitnesses, that's the real tragedy. To the family and the friends, when you're told that there have been 7 previous investigations in an ARB, you should immediately ask, why did you miss so many witnesses? Why did you miss so many documents? This is not a prosecution, Mr. Schiff. You and I are both familiar with them. I've reached no conclusions, and I would advise you to not reach any conclusions either until we reach the end. There are 20 more witnesses. So I'll agree not to reach any conclusions if you'll do the same. With that, Madam Secretary, regardless of where he ranked in the order of advisors, it is undisputed that a significant number of your emails were to or from a Sidney Blumenthal. Now, he did not work for the State Department. He didn't work for the U.S. government at all. He wanted to work for the State Department, but the White House said no to him. Do you recall who specifically at the White House down for a job at the State Department?
Of consulting contracts with different did some work for my husband.
Well, the Clinton.
Sure he did.
He worked for Correct the Record.
I'm sure he did.
When you were asked about Sidney Blumenthal, you said he was an old friend who sent you unsolicited emails, which you passed on in some instances because you wanted to hear from people outside what you called the bubble. We will ignore for a second whether or not Sidney Blumenthal is outside the bubble, but I do want to ask you about a couple of those other comments, because what you left out was that he was an old friend who knew absolutely nothing about Libya, was critical of President Obama and others that you work with, loved to send you political and image advice, had business interests in Libya, which he not only alerted you to, but solicited your help for. And you often forwarded his emails, but usually only after you redacted out any identifier so nobody knew where the information was coming from. What does the word unsolicited mean to you?
Means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me, and as I have previously stated, some of it I found interesting, some of it I did not, some of it I forwarded, some of it I did not. I did not know anything about any business interests. I thought that, just as I said previously, newspaper articles, journalists, of which he is one, a former journalist, had some interesting insights. And so we took them on board and evaluated them, and some were helpful and others were not.
I'm going to get to all the points you just made, but I want to start with your public comment that these emails were unsolicited. You wrote to him, another keeper, thanks and please keep them coming. Greetings from Kabul, and thanks for keeping this stuff coming. Any other info about it? Question mark. Are you hearing now? Question mark. Got it. We'll follow up tomorrow. Anything else to convey? Question mark. That one is interesting because that was the very email where Mr. Blumenthal was asking you to intervene on behalf of a business deal that he was pursuing in Libya. What did you mean by what are you hearing now?
I have no idea, Congressman. They started out unsolicited, and as I said, some were of interest. I passed them on, and some were not. And
Well,
so he continued to provide me information that was made available to him.
I don't parse words, and I don't want to be hyper-technical because it's not a huge point, but it is an important point. You didn't say they started off unsolicited. You said
they
they
did.
were. You said they were
Well,
unsolicited.
they were unsolicited, but obviously I
Well-
did respond to some of them,
Well,
and I'm sure that
anything
encouraged
else-
him.
Anything else to convey? What are you hearing now? I'm going to Paris tomorrow night. We'll meet with TNC leaders, so this and additional info useful. Still don't have electricity or BlackBerry coverage post-Irene, so I've had to resort to my new iPad. Let me know if you received this. We'll talk about the new iPad in a little bit. Here's another one. This report is in part a response to your questions. That's an email from him to you. This report is in part a response to your questions. There'll be further information in the next day. If you're the one asking him for information, how does that square with the definition of unsolicited?
I said it began that way, Mr. Chairman, and I will add that both Chris Stevens and Gene Kretz found some information interesting than I could because they knew some of the characters who were being mentioned, and they were the ones, the kind of persons with the expertise that I asked to evaluate to see whether there was any useful information.
We're going to get to that in a second. Now, before you give Mr. Blumenthal too much credit, you agree he didn't write a single one of those cables or memos he sent you.
I'm sorry, what?
He didn't write a single one of those cables or memos.
I don't know who wrote them. He's the one who sent them to me.
Would you be surprised to know not a single one of those was from him?
I don't know where he got the information that he was
Did you
sending
ask?
to me.
Did you ask? You're sending me very specific, detailed intelligence. What is your source? That
Well,
seems to me like a pretty good question.
I did learn later that he was talking to or sharing information from former American intelligence officials.
By the name of? Who wrote those cables? and
I don't
memos?
recall. No, Mr. Chairman.
You had his information passed on to others, but at least on one occasion you asked Ms. Abedine, can you print without any identifiers? Why would you want his name removed?
Because I thought that it would be more important to just look at the substance and to make a determination as to whether or not there was anything to it.
Well, don't people have a right to know the source of the information so they can determine
But
credibility?
he wasn't, as you just said, the source of the information. That was
But you didn't
clear.
know that, Madam Secretary, and that's what you just said.
No, Mr. Chairman. I said that
ma'am, you-
I knew that he didn't have the sources to provide that information. I knew he was getting it from somewhere else. Whether he
did
knew
you
a lot
ask
of
where?
journalists, he knew others in Washington. It could have been a variety of people.
Well, if you're going to determine credibility, don't you want to know the source?
Well, it wasn't credibility so much as trying to follow the threads that were mentioned about individuals. And as I already stated, some of it was useful and some of it was not.
Well, did the president know that Mr. Blumenthal was advising you?
He wasn't advising me. And, you know,
Did he
Mr.
know
Chairman,
that he was the most prolific emailer that we have found on the subjects of Libya and Benghazi?
that's because I do most of my work
That's
about
fair.
Libya on
I'm
email.
not challenging that, Madam Secretary. I am not challenging that. All I'm telling you is the documents show he was your most prolific emailer on Libya and Benghazi. And my question to you is, did the president, the same White House that said you can't handle him, can't hire him, did he know that he was advising you?
He was not advising me, and I have no reason to have ever mentioned that or know that the president knew that.
All right, I want to draw your attention to an email about Libya from Mr. Blumenthal to you dated April 2011. It will be Exhibit 67. And this is informative. Should we pass on, and in parentheticals, unidentified to the White House? if you were going to pass something on to the White House, why would you take off the identifiers?
Because it was important to evaluate the information, and from a lot of intelligence that I have certainly reviewed over the years, you often don't have the source of the intelligence. You look at the intelligence and you try to determine whether or not it is credible, whether it can be followed up on.
Well, I'm going to accept the fact that you and I come from different backgrounds, because I can tell you that an unsourced comment could never be uttered in any courtroom. You have
We're
to
not
have
talking
the
about
right.
courtrooms, Mr. Chairman.
no.
We're talking about intelligence.
No, we're
and-
talking about credibility and the
Well-
ability to assess who a source is and whether or not that source has ever been to Libya, knows anything about Libya, or has business interest in Libya, all of which would be important if you were going to determine the credibility, which I think is why you probably took his information off of what you sent to the White House. But here's another possible explanation that may give us a sense of why maybe the White House didn't want you to hire him in the first place. In one email, he wrote this about the President's Secretary of Defense: I infer Gates' problem is losing an internal debate. Tyler, and by the way, Tyler's Tyler Drumheller, that's who actually authored the cables that you got from Mr. Blumenthal. Tyler knows him well and says he's a mean, vicious little, I'm not going to say the word, but he did. This is an email from Blumenthal to you about the President's Secretary of Defense. And here's another Blumenthal email to you about President's National Security Advisor. Frankly, Tom Donilon's babbling rhetoric about narratives on a phone briefing of reporters on March the 10th has inspired derision among serious foreign policy analysts, both here and abroad. And here's another one from what you say is your old friend, Sidney Blumenthal. This is a quote from him. I would say Obama, and by the way, he left the president part out. I would say Obama appears to be intent on seizing defeat from the jaws of victory. He and his political cronies in the White House and Chicago are, to say the least, unenthusiastic about regime change in Libya. Obama's lukewarm and self-contradicting statements have produced what is, at least for the moment, operational paralysis. I think that may give us a better understanding of why the White House may have told you you cannot hire him. Blumenthal could not get hired by our government, didn't pass any background check at all, had no role with our government, had never been to Libya, had no expertise in Libya, was critical of the president and others that you worked with, shared polling data with you on the intervention in Libya, gave you political advice on how to take credit for Libya, all the while working for the Clinton Foundation and some pseudo-news entities. And Madam Secretary, he had unfettered access to you. And he used that access, at least on one occasion, to ask you to intervene on behalf of a business venture. Do you recall that?
You know, Mr. Chairman, if you don't have any friends who say unkind things privately, I congratulate you. But from my perspective,
I'd like to think I'd correct them.
I don't know what this line of questioning does to help us get to the bottom of the deaths for Americans.
I'll be happy to
help
tell.
us
I'll be
do
happy
better.
to help you understand that, Madam Secretary.
But I want to reiterate what I said to Congresswoman Sanchez. These were originally unsolicited. You've just said that perhaps the main, if not the exclusive author, was a former intelligence agent for our country who rose to the highest levels of the CIA and who was given credit for being one of the very few who pointed out that the intelligence used by the Bush administration to go to war in Iraq was wrong. So I think that, you know, the sharing of information from an old friend that I did not take at face value, that I sent on to those who were experts, is something that, you know, makes sense, but it was certainly not in any way the primary source of or the predominant understanding that we had of what was going on in Libya and what we needed to be doing.
Well, Madam Secretary, I'm out of time, and we'll pick this back up the next round, but I'll go ahead and let you know ahead of time why it's relevant. It's relevant because our ambassador was asked to read and respond to Sidney Blumenthal's drivel. It was sent to him to read and react to. In some instances, on the very same day he was asking for security. So I think it is eminently fair to ask why Sidney Blumenthal had unfettered access to you, Madam Secretary, with whatever he wanted to talk about, and there's not a single solitary email to or from you, to or from Ambassador Stevens. I think that is fair, and we'll take that up next
Gentleman
round.
yield. Gentleman yield.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you've made several inaccurate statements over the past month as you have tried to defend against multiple Republican admissions that the Select Committee has been wasting millions of tax dollars to damage Secretary Clinton's bid for president. On Sunday, you made another inaccurate statement during your appearance on Face the Nation, and it's being taken up here, and this is the relevance. Here's what you said, and I quote, "There are other folks who may have equities in her emails, and there may be other entities who are evaluating her emails. But my interest in them is solely making sure that I get everything I'm entitled to so that I can do my job. The rest of it, classification, Clinton Foundation, you name it, I have zero interest in it, which is why you haven't seen me send a subpoena related to it or interview a single person other than Brian Pagliano, because I need to know that the record is complete." And I'm going back to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I'm
Mr.
waiting.
Chairman, let me finish.
I'm waiting on you.
Let me-
I've been very
I'm
patient.
coming. Just wait.
I'm waiting on the
All right,
inaccurate
statement. I'm getting there. Mr. Chairman.
Well, we gotta take
your
a break.
statement was, well, it's not going to take long. You took up 4 minutes over, so let me have 3.
I've let everybody go over,
Thank
including you, Mr.
Thank you
Congress.
very much. You issued a subpoena to Sidney Blumenthal on May 19th, 2015, compelling him to appear for a deposition on June 16, 2015. You issued this subpoena unilaterally without giving the Select Committee members the opportunity to debate or vote on it. You sent 2 armed marshals to serve the subpoena on Mrs. Blumenthal's wife at their home without having ever sent him a request to participate voluntarily, which he would have done. Then, Mr. Chairman, you personally attended Mr. Blumenthal's deposition. You personally asked him about the Clinton Foundation. You personally directed your staff to ask questions about the Clinton Foundation, which they did more than 50 times. Now, these facts directly contradict the statements you made on national television this last Sunday.
No, sir. With all due respect, they do not. We just heard email after email after email about Libya and Benghazi that Sidney Blumenthal sent to the Secretary of State. I don't care if he sent it by Morse code, carrier pigeon, smoke signals. The fact that he happened to send it by email is irrelevant. What is relevant is that he was sending information to the Secretary of State. That is what's relevant. Now, with respect to the subpoena, if he'd bothered to answer the telephone calls of our committee, he wouldn't have needed a subpoena. I'll be happy to, but you need to make sure the entire record is correct, Mr. Cummings.
And that's exactly what I want to do.
Well, then go ahead.
I'm about to tell you. I move that we put into the record the entire transcript of Sidney Blumenthal. We're going to release the emails. Let's do the transcript. That way the world can see it.
Well, we didn't.
Motion has been seconded.
Well, we're not going to take that up at a hearing. We'll take that up in a
Mr. Chairman,
business
I've consulted
meeting.
with the parliamentarian, and they have informed us that we have a right to a recorded vote on that motion. We want, you know, you
Well, I'll tell you
asked
what,
for the
let's do
truth,
that.
the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Well, that's what we want to have. Let the world see it.
Why is it that you only want Mr. Blumenthal's transcript released? Why don't you
I'd
want
like
the
to have all of
survivors?
them released.
The survivors? Names?
Let me
you
tell
want
you
that?
something. No,
you want that released?
Let me tell you something. Right now,
The only one
right
you've
now,
asked
the
for
only
is Sidney Blumenthal.
the
That's the only one you've asked for. That and Miss Mills.
Cheryl Mills.
That's not true.
Now, 2 out of 54.
Chairman asked for a
Now, if you want to ask for some fact
We asked for a
witnesses,
recorded vote on the Blumenthal. You said from the beginning, we want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Why don't we just put the entire transcript out there and let the world see it? What do you have to hide?
His are the only emails that you have released. And the fairness to Mr. Blumenthal and to the American people, in the interest of a complete record, if you're going to release his emails, release his transcript where he has a chance to give the context of those emails.
well, You keep referring to Blumenthal emails. I would hasten to remind both of you, the only reason we have Blumenthal emails is because he emailed the Secretary of State. Those are her emails. That's why they were released. They're not Blumenthal's emails, and she wanted all of her emails released. She's been saying since March, I want the entire world to see my emails. Well, Sidney Blumenthal's emails are part of that. So here's what I'll do. I'll be happy to talk to the parliamentarian, because the parliamentarian told me that your motion actually would not be in order for a hearing. But at the latest, we'll take a vote. Then the first week we are back, after this week, we'll have a business meeting. We can take up Mr. Blumenthal's transcript. We can take up whatever other transcripts you want. And while we're there, we can also take up the 20-some outstanding discovery requests that we have to different executive branch entities. Why don't we just take all of it up then?
Mr. Chairman, the allegations that have been made against him are refuted by his own testimony. In the interest of not having...
That's your opinion, Adam.
Well, if you disagree, then release the transcripts.
What allegation, Adam?
Why conceal the transcripts, even if the motion were not in order? You have the power to release them. You have the power to say
I'll tell
right
you why,
now
because
that
I'm not going to release one transcript of someone who knows nothing about Libya by his own admission, while people who risk their lives, you have no interest in their story getting out. You don't want the 18 DS agents. You don't want the CIA agents. The only transcripts you want released are Ms. Mills and Sidney Blumenthal.
Mr. Chairman,
so we'll take all of this up in November.
The only person you were interested in asking about during your entire questioning was Sidney Blumenthal. If you're so interested in him, release the transcript. You selectively released his emails. They're the only witness you've done that for. So you're asking, why are we only asking for his transcript?
I'm going to ask the gentleman from California to please do a better job of characterizing. These are not Sidney Blumenthal's emails. These are Secretary Clinton's emails. And I'll tell you what, if you think you've heard about Sidney Blumenthal so far, wait till the next round.
Sure.
We're adjourned. Chair will now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Clinton, just a few minutes ago, you said some of you have raised the video. The video? You raised the video. At 10:08 on September 11th, 2012, you raised the video. At 10:08, with Americans still fighting for their lives, an hour and a half before the attack ends, you raised the video. So I want to go back to that 10:08 statement. In our first round, you said that the statement was not meant to explain the type of attack or the cause of the attack. So let's look at your statement. Official press statement from the Department of State, statement on the attack in Benghazi, press statement, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Secretary of State, Washington, D.C., September 11th, 2012. 12 sentences in this statement. I'm going to focus on the one. Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. There's a cause, there's a motive presented there, and there's only one motive. You say this, you say, inflammatory material caused vicious behavior. Vicious behavior that led and resulted in the deaths of 4 Americans. There sure seems to be cause there.
Congressman, may I read what I said? What I said is that I condemn in the strongest terms the attack on our mission in Benghazi today. As we work to secure our personnel and facilities, we have confirmed that one of our State Department officers was killed. We are heartbroken by this terrible loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family and those who have suffered in this attack. This evening, I called Libyan President Magharif to coordinate additional support to protect Americans in Libya. President Magharif expressed his condemnation and condolences and pledged his government's full cooperation. Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. The United States deplores any intentional effort to denigrate the religious beliefs of others. Our commitment to religious tolerance goes back to the very beginning of our nation, but let me be clear, there is never any justification for violent acts of this kind. In light of the events of today, the United States government is working with partner countries around the world to protect our personnel, our missions, and American citizens worldwide.
Right, and I'm asking, you said there was no motive, no cause. You weren't trying to explain the cause of the attack. It sure seems to me like you did.
Well,
attempted-
Congressman,
you,
what
you said you presented inflammatory material was the reason for the vicious behavior. Is that not a cause and effect?
Well, that's not what it says. What I said was, some
You
have
know what you
sought-
said? You read the whole thing.
I did.
I'm asking about that one sentence because earlier you said it wasn't, there was no cause, no motive presented. I think there was. And that's what I think most of the American people thought.
Well, I know there was a great deal of news coverage that looked at the events in Cairo, looked at what happened in Benghazi, and drew some comparisons and maybe even connections. I know, as we've just heard from Congressman Schiff, there was a lot of fast-moving analysis by the intelligence community to try to make sense of all of this. And I can only tell you from the perspective of having been
Secretary Clinton, hang on a second. If the intelligence may have changed some, but your story didn't. That's the point.
Well, that is
privately, your story was much different than it was publicly. Again, you said to the Egyptian Prime Minister, we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. You said to your family, terrorists killed 2 of our good people. So your story privately is much different than what you're telling the American people. The intelligence may have changed, the video may have had an impact in other places, but in Benghazi it didn't, and you tried to put them all together. That's what bothers us. Let me show you a slide here. This is from September 14th. And the first statement's by Jay Carney. Let's be clear, these protests were a reaction to a video that had spread to the region. We have no information to suggest that Benghazi was a pre-planned attack. The statement below is from your press person in Libya. Sends this to Greg Hicks and to the experts in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau, the same people who said Susan Rice was off the reservation on 5 networks. Here's what they get. Here's what she says to them. Benghazi, more terrorist attack than a protest. We want to distinguish, not conflate the events. This was a well-planned attack. So again, privately, the experts in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau, the experts on Libya, know that this was a well-planned attack, but publicly, Jay Carney is saying the same thing you're saying publicly. We have no information that this was pre-planned. This was caused by a video.
Congressman, the next morning at 9:59, I gave another statement, and I listened carefully to what you said, and you kept talking about cause. Well, the word cause is not in my statement of the night before.
I'm referring to what you said to me in our first exchange a few hours ago.
No, well, I'm sorry, Congressman. If I haven't been clear, I will try to be clearer. I was talking about people throughout the region trying to justify attacks on our facilities, as we saw later in the week, and justifying their behavior and repeating it and using the fact of the video not only to arouse crowds, as we saw in the video clips that the ranking member played, but also that would deter governments from coming to our rescue because they would be perhaps ambivalent about doing so. So you're right. I mentioned the video because I feared what would happen, and in fact, it did happen. And in the next morning, the night before was a brief statement that we put out because we knew we had lost Sean Smith, and I felt an obligation to tell that to the American people.
Madam Secretary?
The next morning, I gave a much longer statement, and it was very clear. Heavily armed militants assaulted the compound and set fire to our buildings.
Secretary
That's what
Clinton,
it says.
Secretary Clinton, that's all good, but you said you were trying to communicate to folks all over, all the folks you have around the Middle East, right? You thought that
Yes, I was trying to
important
send a message, yes.
Okay, I got it. But that's not what the experts said. They said, don't conflate the events. Tell the truth about Benghazi, talk about what happened there. Other places where the video may have had an impact, fine, say that. Why'd you put them all together? When you didn't do that privately, when you told your family about Benghazi, it was terrorists killed 2 of our people. When you talked to the Libyan president, Ansar al-Sharia did it, al-Qaeda did it. When you talked to the Egyptian prime minister, we know it's not a film, we know it's not a protest, we know it's not a video, it's a terrorist attack.
Well, Congressman, I was working off the information that we had, which was that Ansar al-Sharia claimed responsibility. And at that point, I did say that it was an al-Qaeda related group.
Madam Secretary, look at the difference in these two statements. One says it wasn't a pre-planned attack. That's Jay Carney talking publicly. The other one says, from your experts in Libya, says it was a well-planned attack. Now, they could not be further apart. They could not be. That's what I'm having a hard time figuring out. And you know what's interesting? The date of this, 9/14/12, 9/14/12. You know what else happened on the 14th, September 14th? There's another document that's kind of important. That's the same day that Ben Rhodes drafted his talking points memo, bullet point number 2, to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video, not a broader failure of policy, because we couldn't have Libya, your baby, as Mr. Roskin pointed out earlier, we couldn't have that fail. Can't have that. So the same day you got Jay Carney saying this was no way a pre-planned attack, and the experts in Libya, talking Greg Hicks and the Near Eastern Affairs people, are saying it was a well-planned attack. That same day, the talking points that get Susan Rice ready for the Sunday shows, make sure you focus on the video.
Congressman,
make sure you focus on the video, not about a broader policy failure. After all, we got an election coming in 50-some days.
Well, Congressman, I believe to this day the video played a role. I believe that the person we have...
But your ex didn't.
There were many experts. If you look, you probably haven't had an opportunity to read the excellent report issued by the Democrats, but on September 13th, the intelligence community issued its first thorough, fully coordinated assessment of what happened in Benghazi. It said, we assess the attacks on Tuesday against the U.S. consulate in Benghazi began spontaneously. The attacks began spontaneously following the protests at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. Extremists with ties to al-Qaeda were involved in the attacks. There is no contradiction. The protest, because of the video, bringing in those who are affiliated with al-Qaeda, there is no contradiction, Congressman.
How about this contradiction? Well-planned attack, no pre-planned attack. How about that? One of them is well-planned, one of them isn't. Jay Carney says there was no pre-planned attack, and the experts in Libya said it was a pre-planned
Well, the
attack.
experts in Libya were among the experts looking at this and analyzing it. We went on the basis of the intelligence community, and they were scrambling to get all the information that they could. And yes, the intelligence community assessment served as the basis for what Ambassador Rice said when she appeared on the Sunday show. And on September 18th, when the video footage arrived from the security cameras, the deputy CIA director has testified. It was not until September 18th when the CIA received the Libyan government's assessment of video footage that showed the front of the facility with no sign of protesters that it became clear we needed to revisit our analysis. And then, after they looked at the video footage and FBI reporting from interviews of personnel on the ground in Benghazi during the attacks, the CIA changed its assessment. And that was explained thoroughly in the bipartisan report issued by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which did a very thorough job, Congressman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Roby.
Secretary Clinton, I want to follow up on questions about the night of the attack and decisions made then. You wrote in your book, Hard Choices, that you were directing the State Department response the night of September 11th, 2012, but you also stated that you left your office on the night of the attacks and went to your home in Northwest Washington because you said you knew the next few days were going to be taxing and the department was going to be looking to you. I want to talk about a few things. Do you have a SCIF in your home?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and who else was at your home? Were you alone?
I was alone, yes.
The whole night?
Well, yes, the whole night.
Well, I don't know why that's funny. I mean, did you have any in-person briefings? I don't find it funny at all.
I'm sorry, a little note of levity 7:15.
Well, I mean, the reason
Noted
I
for
say
the
it's not
record.
funny is because it went well into the night when our folks on the ground were still in danger. So I don't think it's funny to ask
Well,
you if you were alone the whole night.
Congresswoman, you asked if I had a skiff. I had secure phones. I had other equipment that kept me in touch with the State Department at all times. I did not sleep all night. I was very much focused on what we were doing.
Okay, who was
By
at your
then,
office when you left? Was Cheryl Mills, your chief of staff, still at the office when you left?
I don't remember. I know that a lot of my staff were
I'm going to
there.
go through and name them. We'll see if you remember. Jake Sullivan, was he still there?
Well, yes, they were all there when I left. They were all there,
Okay,
certainly.
Victoria Newland was there when you left?
When I left, everyone was there.
Philippe Ranis was there?
I can give you a blanket answer. When I left,
Well, no, I'm going to ask specifics. Was Patrick Kennedy there?
I'm sure he was.
Was Philip Ranis there?
I don't know. I don't know
What
whether.
about
he was.
Stephen Mall?
I'm sure that the core team at the State Department was still there.
Beth Jones
I'm sure she was.
and Bill Burns and Thomas Nides?
I have no specific recollection of any of the names you've given me because when I left, I knew I would stay in touch, and I do not know how long anybody else stayed at the State
What
Department.
time did you learn that Sean Smith had died?
That was earlier in the evening.
So that was before you left?
Yes,
Okay, and then what about Ambassador Stevens? Was that
it was before I left.
Okay, and then what about his confirmation of his death, before or after you left?
We knew that, yes.
Okay, and what about the recovery of his body? Was that before or after you left?
We got word that we had a sighting of,
Confirmation.
well, I'm trying to tell you what we knew and how we found out because it was something that we were trying to determine, and we had mixed signals about what we learned, and it was our understanding, and certainly by the time I left, that he was most likely not alive, but I'm not sure exactly when we were able to confirm that because it depended upon getting firsthand information from a Libyan contact.
Okay. Where were you when you learned of the second attack? Were you at home or at the
I was at
office?
home.
And did you go back to the State Department when you learned about the second attack, or did you stay home?
I stayed home. I went to the State Department early in the morning. The CIA annex attack, as I recall, was late in the evening, early the next morning, by our time, around 5 a.m. or so in Benghazi.
Did you meet with the president that night?
I talked with the president. I did not meet with him.
How many times did you talk to the president?
I talked to the president that evening. That was the only time I talked with him on the 11th, and then I went over to the White House the next morning.
So, and do you recall what time you spoke to the president? You said that evening. Do you recall more specifically what time?
I think it was late in the evening. I don't know exactly when.
What did you discuss?
Sorry, what?
What specifically did you discuss with the president?
Well, I don't usually talk about my discussions with the president, but I can tell you we talked about what had happened during the day. I thanked him for his very strong support because he made it absolutely clear that everyone was supposed to be doing all they could, particularly DOD, to assist us wherever possible. And I'm sure I thanked him for that.
What did he say to you?
Again, I don't talk about the conversations I have with the president. We talked about the events of the day and his determination to do everything he could to try to help our people in Benghazi.
Did you meet Secretary Panetta?
No, I did not.
Did you speak to Secretary Panetta?
The next day,
Not on the 11th,
no.
okay? Did you talk with General Dempsey?
The next morning I did.
So you did not meet with him or talk with him on the 11th?
Congresswoman, it wasn't necessary. Everybody was doing everything they could think of to do. It's one of the reasons I sat in on the
I'm
civets.
just trying to figure out if you did or you didn't.
Well, I'm telling you, I sat in on the civets that Congresswoman Sanchez was asking me about, because I wanted to talk to the operational people, and they were represented on that civets. They were the ones who were carrying out the orders that they received from the president on down.
What about Petraeus? When did you speak to him? And
I spoke to Petraeus that afternoon because I knew that we had an agreement with the CIA annex, and I spoke with him about an hour after finding out about the attack and after gathering information about what we thought was happening in Benghazi.
did you, your surviving agents were evacuated to Tripoli the morning of the 12th. Did you talk to the survivors either that night or once they arrived in Tripoli?
We did not speak to them directly. We obviously made arrangements for them to be safely evacuated and then to be transported to a hospital facility that we thought was safe from any potential attacks.
Did you talk to them the next day?
No.
Did you talk to them later that week?
No, I did not.
Did you talk to them when they first got back to the United States?
I did not talk to them until they had had an opportunity to be debriefed and to provide information that would help us understand what happened, help the intelligence community, and help the FBI as they were trying to build their case.
How would it have harmed the case that they were trying to build for you, Secretary of State, just to check in on their well-being?
I did check on their well-being. I
No,
kept
personally.
Well,
Personally.
I did personally talk with the people who were taking care of them, transporting them
The
to Germany.
survivors. When did you talk to the survivors?
I talked to the survivors when they came back to the United States, and one who was for many months in Walter Reed on the telephone.
Okay, and going
you know
back
what?
to Panetta and Dempsey, you have stated that they were the decision makers, but you never spoke with them while your people were on the ground.
I'm sorry.
I want to make sure this is clear. Panetta and Dempsey were the decision makers when it came to response. We've already talked about the fest, so I'm not going to get back into that. But what I'm trying to clarify is that they were the decision makers, your people were on the ground in harm's way, and you never had a conversation with them.
I did not need to. During the turmoil of that afternoon and into the evening, we knew the president had personally told them both in the Oval Office that he expected them to do everything they possibly could do. And I knew that they would then turn to those officers responsible for carrying out that order. They were represented on that civets. That's why I sat in it. And remember, too, Congresswoman, we had a lot of other threats coming in. We were still worried about Cairo.
I understand, but you had your people on the ground that were being attacked. I want to get back to the survivors in the little time I have left. Did you talk to the survivors directly at all?
Yeah.
At any point, can you tell us when?
It was kind of a rolling series of conversations. When they came back to the State Department, I met with and talked with them. As you know, their names have never been made public. I don't intend to today.
And can you give me a month?
I'm sorry, what?
A month?
It was, for some of them, it was less time than that. And for one of them, I talked with him on the phone. I did not get to physically see him until he'd been released from the hospital, and that was early in 2013.
I think, Mr. Chairman, there's two messages here. I think the first message is that is the message that you sent to your personnel the night of the attack, that you went home. They all stayed there and you didn't go back to the next morning. I think the second message that is sent is that you used the FBI's inquiry as an excuse not to check in with your agents who were on the ground, who survived that horrible night, just to ask them how they were. I yield back.
Well, if I could respond, Congresswoman, I think that again is part of a theory that you and your colleagues are attempting to weave. It was made very clear that the FBI wanted a fresh and clean opportunity to speak with the survivors, which I totally understand. And in fact, their investigation has led to the charging of at least one person, and I hope we find all of them and bring them to justice.
The lady yields back. The chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Secretary Clinton, to get to the truth about Benghazi, we need the complete record. Your emails are part of the record, and we believe the record might be incomplete, in part because your version of events surrounding your email situation keeps changing. Last month, on September 20th, you said, quote, "I'm being as transparent as possible, more transparent than anybody else ever has been." You didn't say more transparent than anybody. You said more transparent than anybody else ever. Now, my definition of transparency includes being honest and straightforward, and being honest and straightforward right from the start, right from the get-go. So let's look at a few things that you said here in the last few months. On March 10th, you said this. You provided all work-related emails erring on the side of anything that might be a federal record. In September, you revised that statement, and you said Mr. Blumenthal had some emails that you didn't. Of course, the revised statement was after we interviewed Mr. Blumenthal about Benghazi and found out that we didn't receive from you and the State Department the same information we received from him. In March, you said it was your practice to email government officials on their .gov accounts. Later, you revised that statement, and you said there was a fraction of emails with work-related information sent to government officials on their personal accounts.
I'm sorry, but what does this have to do with what happened in Benghazi?
Of course.
When are we going to get there?
The gentleman is not recognized. The gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
And it has everything to do because we want the record so we can get to the truth. And maybe if the gentleman from Washington would have shown up for more than just 1 hour of one interview, he might know a little more about the situation as well and the lack of getting the record. Of course, this second statement, the revised statement, was after this committee had contacted Huma Abedin, Jake Sullivan, Philippe Reines, asking for their personal accounts, which of course you knew would mean we would get their emails. And that first statement in March was not accurate. In March, you said no classified information was sent or received on your personal accounts. You later revised your statement and said no information marked classified was sent or received on your personal account. And once again, your revised statement was after the Inspector General for the intelligence community had examined your emails and determined that, yes, some indeed were classified. Secretary Clinton, seems like a pattern of change in your story. In March, you say one thing, the truth comes out, weeks and months later, you say something else. That's not being the most transparent person ever. That's not even being transparent. So, if your story about your emails keeps changing, then how can we accept your statement that you've turned over all work-related emails and all emails about Libya?
Well, Congressman, I have said repeatedly that I take responsibility for my use of personal email. I've said it was a mistake. I've said that it was allowed, but it was not a good choice. When I got to the department, we were faced with a global financial crisis, major troop decisions on Afghanistan, the imperative to rebuild our alliances in Europe and Asia, an ongoing war in Iraq, and so much else. Email was not my primary means of communication. As I have said earlier, I did not have a computer on my desk. I've described how I did work in meetings, secure and unsecure phone calls, reviewing many, many pages of materials every day, attending a great deal of meetings, and I provided the department, which has been providing you, with all of my work-related emails, all that I had, approximately 55,000 pages, and they are being publicly released.
I appreciate it, and let's get into that. Those 55,000 pages, 62,000 emails, total emails on your system. You have stated that you used a multi-step process to determine which ones were private, which ones were public, which ones belonged to you and your family, which ones belonged to the taxpayer. Who oversaw this multi-step process in making that determination, which ones we might get and which ones that were personal?
That was seen by my attorneys, and they conducted a rigorous review of my emails. And
these are the folks sitting behind you there, Mr. Kendall, Ms. Mills,
yes,
Ms. Samuelson?
That's right.
All right. And you said rigorous. What does that mean?
It means that they were asked to provide anything that could be possibly construed as work-related. In fact, in my opinion, and that's been confirmed by both the State Department.
I'm asking how it was done. Did someone physically look at the 62,000 emails, or did you use search terms, date parameters? I want to know the specifics.
They did all of that, and I did not look over their shoulders because I thought it would be appropriate for them to conduct that search, and they did.
Will you provide this committee, or can you answer today? What were the search terms?
The search terms were everything you could imagine that might be related to anything, but they also went through every single email.
But that's not answering the question. What were the search terms? Search terms means terms. What terms did you use?
I did
what were
not.
The date parameters? What date did you start? What was the end date? And the emails in between there we're going to look at.
Well, Congressman, I asked my attorneys to oversee the process. I did not look over their shoulder. I did not dictate how they would do it. I did not ask what they were doing and how they made their conclusions.
You don't know what terms they used to determine which ones were your emails, which ones the State Department got and therefore we might get?
You know, the State Department had between 90 and 95% of all the ones that were work-related. They were already on the system. In fact, this committee got
I'm not asking about those. I'm asking about the 62,000 that were exclusively on your system.
90 to 95% of all work-related emails were already in.
Well, we know that the National Archivist, Secretary Clinton, we know the National Archivist said 1,250 were clearly personal. No way you should have sent them to the State Department. And then we also know that 15 you missed because we got those from Mr. Blumenthal when he came and was for his deposition.
Thank you.
So if you missed 15 you should have given us, and you gave us 1,250 that not we say, but the National Archivist says you never should have turned over. You erred on both sides. So again, that's why we want to know the terms, because if you've made a mistake both ways, you might have made more mistakes we don't know.
Well, first of all, you had 9 hours with one of my attorneys. And since I think the Democrats just finally released the transcript, I haven't had a chance to...
And I specifically asked Ms. Mills.
Well,
I did. I asked her about this, and she gave me basically the same kind of answer you're giving me.
Well, she'll be happy to supplement the record.
But she's not on the witness stand today. You are, and I'm asking you.
Well, but I asked my attorneys to do it. I thought that was the appropriate way to proceed.
Let me do one other statement. Because it sounds like we're not, I hope you'll turn those. I hope we'll know the terms. I think the American people like to know what terms you use to determine what we might get, so that we could get all the information on Libya and find out what happened where these 4 Americans gave their lives. I think that's critical. In March, you also said your server was physically located on your property, which is protected by the Secret Service. Now, I'm having a hard time figuring this out because this story's been all over the place, but there was one server on your property in New York and a second server hosted by a Colorado company and housed in New Jersey. Is that right? There were 2 servers?
No. There was a server that
one?
was already being used by my husband's team, an existing system in our home that I used. And then later, again, my husband's office decided that they wanted to change their arrangements, and that's when they contracted with the company in Colorado.
And so there's only one server? Is that what you're telling me? And it's the one server that the FBI has?
The FBI has the server that was used during the tenure of my State Department service.
Okay. In your statement, you said it was protected by the Secret Service. Why'd you mention the Secret Service?
Well, because...
Here's what I'm thinking. Could a Secret Service agent standing at the back door of your house protect someone in Russia or China from hacking into your system? Why'd you mention the Secret Service agent?
Out of just an abundance of being transparent.
Transparent. And what's the relevance to protecting from classified information?
There was nothing marked classified on my emails, either sent or received, and I want to respond.
Use the right term there. Use marked. Yeah, that's the one. That's
well,
what you revised. Use the revised statement there.
Well, Congress, there was a lot of confusion because many many Americans have no idea how the classification process works. And therefore, I wanted to make it clear that there is a system within our government, certainly within the State Department, where materials that is thought to be classified is marked such so that people have the opportunity to know how they are supposed to be handling
I got 1
those
second.
materials. And that's why it became clearer, I believe, to say that nothing was marked classified at the time I sent or received it.
All right. All I know is that's different what you said in March. I got one last question. The FBI's got your server. They're doing a forensic review of your server. They may recover emails that you deleted from your system. So, I didn't say this, you said it. You just said a little bit ago too, transparency. You said you were the more transparent than anybody else ever. So I want to ask you just one simple question. If the FBI finds some of these emails that might be deleted as they're reviewing your server, will you agree to allow a neutral third party, like a retired federal judge, to review any emails deleted to determine if any of them are relevant to our investigation?
Congressman, as you point out, there is a security inquiry being conducted by the Department of Justice, and I trust that they will do whatever is appropriate to reach their conclusions.
But would you, as the most transparent person ever, would you commit to saying, if whatever they find, I want a retired federal judge to evaluate that and look and see if we need some of that information to get to the truth?
I have been releasing my emails to the public. That is transparency, and as I stand by my statement, so far as I know, in the modern era, I am the only government official who's ever done that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields back. Madam Secretary, I couldn't help but think when he was using the $20 million figure, that's 2 more ISIS fighters that we could have paid for. I refuse to put a price tag on the lives of 4 Americans. I don't, your figure of 20 million is wrong, Mr. Cummings, and that's not what the State Department told us. But I don't care what the figure is. There is no price tag when it comes to justice for 4 people who gave their lives for this country. Madam Secretary, with respect to the ARB, I want to ask you this. If you were investigating Benghazi or what happened in Benghazi, and there was an author of an email 3 months to the day, 3 months to the day from when our 4 fellow Americans were killed, the author of the email says anti-American demonstration, looking for Americans to attack, game changer, soft target, no continuity, the cost to continue to do business there may become challenging. Would you want to talk to the author of that email if you were investigating Benghazi?
The Accountability Review Board had full run of the State Department to talk to anyone they chose to talk to. It's my understanding they conducted more than 100 interviews, and they were well aware, as their report reflects, of the dangerous situation in Libya.
I don't want to interrupt you. That actually was not my question. My question is, would you want to talk to that person? Not whether or not the ARB did, because the ARB actually did talk to that person. My question is, wouldn't you want to talk to that person if you were investigating Benghazi?
Well,
I promise it is not a trick question. The answer is yes. You would want to talk to the person who authored that email.
And as you just said, Mr. Chairman, the ARB did.
Yes, and the co-chair of the ARB called your chief of staff and told the author of that email not to go to Congress. That's my point. My point is the ARB did some good things. That's why our first 2 hearings were on making sure the recommendations by the ARB were actually implemented. But when the author of that email is going to be brought before Congress and one of the co-chairs calls your chief of staff and says, I don't think that that witness is going to be a good witness, Madam Secretary, with all due respect, she's a fact witness, whether she's good or bad. The author of that email has a right for Congress to question them. That's not even a close question. So somebody can be a good person, and I have no doubt that Mr. Mullen and Mr. Pickering both are. But this is also what I don't doubt. I don't doubt that that phone call was made to Ms. Mills. And don't send Charlene Lamb before Congress. She's not going to make a good witness. And I don't doubt that there's not a transcript from any of the ARB interviews. And you may say, well, why does that matter? If you're going to write a report and you want to write a report with specificity and particularity, you have to cite the transcript. And I can't tell you a single question that was asked of a single ARB witness because there is no transcript. So my point is not that the ARB did a bad job or a good job. My point is from a standpoint of a serious investigation, it was an inadequate job. And I want to hopefully prove that to you. There used to be a stack up there when Mr. Smith was with us about all the previous investigations that Congress and the ARB had done. Did any of those previous congressional investigations or the ARB have access to your emails?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, the witness you were referring to did appear before Congress.
That was not my point.
Well, but your implication was that that witness was stopped from going to Congress.
No,
and in fact, that did not happen, Mr. Chairman.
No, she definitely came.
Yes.
No, that's not my implication. My implication is the co-chair of what you call an independent accountability review board was calling someone he was supposed to be investigating to say, please don't send that witness to Congress. They're not going to show up well. That's my point. My point is, how can you consider that to be, I mean,
Well,
have you ever heard of a judge calling the DA or the defense attorney and say, don't call that witness?
I don't care what you all say about me. It doesn't bother me a bit. I do care a lot about what you're implying about Admiral Mullen, and I will not sit here and hear that.
Well,
Admiral Mullen served this country with great distinction. He served the State Department with great distinction in being the co-chair of the Accountability Review Board. And I think his work speaks for itself.
Well,
and I'm sorry that the important work that was done by that board is held in such low regard by some members of this committee, and I deeply regret it.
Are you doubting that he placed the phone call? Is that the purpose?
I know
of what
nothing
you said?
about the phone call.
Well, I do, because he testified before another congressional committee. He admits it was a mistake, Madam Secretary. I don't know why you can't.
Well,
He admits it was a mistake to call and say, don't send a fact witness before a congressional committee.
well, I think that
That doesn't mean he's a bad person. It just means that when you hold up the ARB as independent and your chief of staff picked most of the folks on it, Patrick Kennedy had a role in picking some of the folks on the ARB, despite the fact that some people think Patrick Kennedy may have also been involved in approving or not approving. If you need to read a note from your lawyer, you're welcome to, Madam Secretary.
No, it's just hard to sit here listening to the comments you're making about someone that I consider to be a great American. If he said he made a mistake, that's even more proof of what a fine gentleman he is and what a great public servant he is. And it doesn't in any way, what you're saying, impugn his service for 40 years, and certainly not his service on the Accountability Review Board. I can't help it, Mr. Chairman, that you all don't like the findings of the Accountability Review
Ma'am,
Board.
we had
I can't
two
help
hearings.
it that you don't like the findings of
we had
all the
two
other
hearings.
congressional committees.
We had 2 hearings where we did nothing but discuss the implementation of the ARB findings, Madam Secretary. So with all due respect, we've had more hearings about the ARB findings than we have with you. So don't tell me that we don't care about the ARB. We had 2 hearings. My point is this: the ARB nor the previous congressional investigations had access to your emails, did they?
I don't know what they had access to. I know that during the time I was at the State Department, there was certainly a great effort to respond to your predecessor, Congressman Iss's inquiries, and many thousands of pages of information was conveyed to the Congress. And I know that the State Department has worked diligently and persistently to try to respond to the many requests that it has received. And I think that given the pressure and stress of business they've been under, they have performed as well as they could. So you will be getting, and in fact the entire world will be getting, all of my emails, because they're all going to be public, and you will be able to read them along with everybody else.
Madam Secretary, that actually was not my question. My question was whether or not the previous congressional committees and ARB had access to your emails. That was my question.
90 to 95% of my work emails were in the state system. If they wanted to see them, they would certainly have been able to
You
do
know what?
so.
That is maybe the 10th time you have cited that figure today.
It is.
And I have not heard anyone other than you ever cite that figure. Who told you that 90 to 95% of your emails were in the State Department system? Who told you that?
We learned that from the State Department in their analysis of the emails that were already on the system. We were trying to help them close some gaps that they had.
Can you
but
provide
they
me?
they
Can you
already
provide
had
me with a name? Because when I asked the State Department 10 days ago, what's the source of that figure? They shrugged their shoulders.
Well, you can look for the state.gov addresses, and they certainly pop up. And
Right,
that's
and the
where,
Inspector General report, Madam Secretary, the Inspector General report, which you can't argue by perfect analogy, but you can certainly extrapolate, the Inspector General report found that less than 1% of State Department emails, record emails, were captured. So they give a number of less than 1%, and you give a number of 90%.
well, I don't know what you're referring to. I can only speak about my emails, my work-related emails.
Well, let's talk about your work-related emails. We asked for them last year, and the State Department gave us 8. If they had 90% of yours, why did we only get 8?
Well, I don't know initially what you asked for, but I know that they tried to be responsive. 90 to 95% of them were on state.gov. I understand that the committee broadened the scope of their requests, and I think that in response, the State Department has been trying to provide what you have requested. In the meantime, they're going through the process of making all of my emails public.
Our first request, there were only 8 emails responsive to our first request?
I can't speak. I believe your first request was for Benghazi, and I believe that the State Department did a diligent search. Then I believe you expanded it to Libya and weapons and maybe a few other terms, and I believe they conducted
our
a
jurisdiction
diligent.
hasn't grown, Madam Secretary. Our jurisdiction is the same thing it was. Let me ask you this. You say that you turned over everything. I don't get a chance to watch you a lot on television, but when I see you are interviewed, you make a point of saying, I turned over everything.
All my work-related emails.
How do you know that?
I know that because there was an exhaustive search done under the supervision of my attorneys, and that is exactly the outcome. We turned over every work-related email. In fact, as somebody referred to earlier, we turned over too many. In the State Department and the National Archives said there were 1,246 out of the 30,000 plus that they've already determined did not need to be turned over.
And you
Point
have a
of
really
order, Mr. Chair.
good group of attorneys, which makes me
Chairman,
wonder
point of
how
order.
they missed 15 of them.
Well, if you're talking about Mr. Blumenthal, which I assume you are, he had some that I didn't have, and I had some that he didn't have, and I was under no obligation to make any of his emails available unless I decided they were work-related. And the ones that I decided that were work-related, I forwarded to the state.gov accounts of the people with whom I worked.
Secretary, is there any question that the 15 that James Cole turned over to us were work-related? There was no ambiguity about that. They were work-related.
They were from a personal friend, not any official government, government official, and I determined on the basis of looking at them what I thought was work-related and what wasn't. And some I didn't even have time to read, Mr. Chairman.
Are you
Mr.
telling
Chairman,
me the
regular order.
15, are you telling me that the
Chairman.
15, I will tell the gentle lady from California that I'm going to take a little bit extra time, just like everybody else has, and we can either do it this round, or we can do it next round.
May I make a simple inquiry about how many more minutes the chairman plans?
The fewer the interruptions, the quicker I can get done. I'll put it to you that way.
Okay.
How's that?
I'm just
The
mindful
15,
of the time.
my question to you on the 15 is, did your lawyers find them and decide that they weren't work-related, or did they not find them?
Well, I don't know why he had emails I didn't, and I don't know why apparently I had emails he didn't. And all I can tell you is that I turned over every work-related email in my possession.
All right, I'm going to make 2 more observations, and then we're going to call it a night. The first observation that I would make is that when you speak to the public, you say, I turned over everything. That's, for the most part, a direct quote. When you talk to the public, you say, I turned over everything. When you talk to the court, you say, while I do not know what information may be responsive for purposes of this lawsuit, I have directed that all my emails on clintonemail.com in my custody that were or potentially were federal records be provided to the Department of State, and on information and belief that was done. Why the different explanation depending on who you're talking to?
Well, one is a shorthand, Mr. Chairman.
Well, why not just tell the court, I turned over everything?
Well, you know how lawyers are. They use more words perhaps than they need.
Trust me, I know that,
thought
and
you
they
might.
charge you for every one of them.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that, Mr. Chairman, and the clock is ticking.
Well, one more, and I'll pay Mr. Kendall's fee for the last question.
Oh, I don't
How's
think you
that?
want to do that, Mr. Chairman.
I probably can't do it. You see my point, though? You're very definitive when you're talking to the American people that you turned over everything.
That's right.
But they're those kind of lawyerly fudge words when you're talking to court on information and belief.
Well,
And the reality is, even tonight, you cannot tell us that you turned over everything because you didn't think you missed the 15.
well, I didn't have them. I turned over everything I had. Everything I had has
Which
been
means
turned
the
over
system
to the
you
State
had
Department.
somehow missed those 15.
Well,
Last question on your system. Mr. Cummings said that your email arrangement was inappropriate. I think the president may have said it was a mistake. You have said that it was a mistake. My question to you, Madam Secretary, is was it a mistake for the 4 years that you had that email arrangement? Was it a mistake for the almost 2 years that you kept the public record to yourself, or has it manifest itself as a mistake in just the last 6 months?
well, since I believed that all of my work-related emails to .gov accounts were being captured and preserved, it wasn't until I was asked to help the State Department to fill in what they saw as some record-keeping gaps, not just with me, but with others. I did the best I could during those 4 years and thought that everything that I was emailing that was work-related was being preserved.
If you can find a source for the 90 to 95%, I would be grateful for it, and we would probably have fewer questions. If there is a source that you provide that 90 to 95% were on the State Department system, then I'll know that I need to ask the State Department what took them so long. Because I'm just telling you, Madam Secretary, I got 8 emails the first time I asked, and now I've got over 1,500. So there's some disconnect there.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that is a fair question. And I'm not at the State Department any longer, but I do want to defend them. They are under the most extraordinary pressure to answer congressional inquiries. I saw a figure recently that FOIA requests have jumped something like 300%. They don't have the resources. They don't have the personnel. They take their responsibility of reading every single line, and as Ranking Member Cummings reminded us, having to redact personal information, personnel information, obviously they take it very seriously. I think they're doing the best they can, and I know that they've tried to be responsive to you and to the many other requests that have come their way.
Well, Madam Secretary, on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for your patience and for your willingness to come, and you have been willing to come in the past, as I noted in my opening, and we appreciate it, and with that, we will be adjourned.
Thank you.